Claire is working for a small startup called Kind. Their goal is to let you add powerful authentication to your product with just a few lines of code, which sounds very good. With Claire's presentation, you'll be invited to imagine going back to an earlier time where you get to make all the decisions about docs, how they're created, published, maintained, scaled. Ideal, right? A startup might seem like the ideal clean slate, but it is also a world of unique extremes and complexities. This is where Claire wants to eat her pie, but hopes the calories only affect her future self. Claire is an animal lover and has rescued a greyhound called Nessie. She walks every week with a group of her greyhound friends and volunteers at an anti-racing greyhound group where she works on research, reports, and process docs. She's also 100% on Team No FAQ, so you can take that up with her after disembarking from our journey today. Please welcome Claire Mahoney.
Thank you. Thanks, Jared. Hello, everyone. I think ironic that it's just before lunch that we'll be talking about pie, maybe. I'm glad we had a little break and everyone's not hungry sitting there. And I think I'd win some kind of prize for most obscure talk title. You have no idea what it's about. I'm also going to do that thing where I don't even tell you what's coming. I'm not doing a table of contents like others have done. I'll tell you a bit about myself first. I'm a content designer at Kind, as Jared said. And I have worked as a contractor and a freelancer and changed industries, mostly still working in software, but different industries. Doing UX writing and content design and tech writing and working on docs and knowledge bases and all kinds of writing projects. I love variety. I like to learn new things, incidental about where I work. I've worked on documents about bunkering ships and other kind of unusual things that have a whole lot of knowledge I don't really need. Don't we all? But let's get the pie and the time travel thing out the way first. So why time travel and why pie? And it sort of starts back at, shout out to the MYB people in the room. My tech writing career started at MYB, and back then, this is ageing me very much, is they printed manuals with your name in it, and we put the manual in a box with a disc, and the disc went to the shop, and the people went to the shop and got the disc and installed it, and there was a whole big process, no downloads. So I guess it's a pretty typical Gen Xy story to go them from like an analogue to kind of digital now. I couldn't figure out quite how to say it. Maybe Sarah can help me out. I work with or work for or work on a bot, an AI bot at work, which is trained on the documentation. So that's new to me. That's another new piece of tech that, kind of exhausts me to think about getting to know yet another big piece of technology. So we still haven't got to the time travel and the pie. So when I took my opportunity at Kind, they invited me to come work for them. I thought, startup, right? Great. They're really new. They were doing the docs in like Google Docs, so, basically nothing. I would have this great opportunity to start fresh, be a clean slate, be an open road, no one's already made those like terrible decisions that, I'd worked on contracts where I'd walked in and gone, oh my God, this knowledge base, or why did they choose that, or how have they structured it that way, or it was completely functional and not task-based, that kind of thing. And so I thought, working at a startup would be a bit like going back in time. So that was the expectation. And most of you are familiar with this. This is Claire Foy. Claire. She is from Outlander, which is a show, just briefly for anyone who hasn't seen it, about a woman who touches a stone in the mid 20th century. She's a war nurse, so she has these medical skills. She goes back in time to 17th century Scotland where there's a heap of muscly blokes and has to kind of learn to adapt to the new rules of that environment. And there are obviously limitations and restrictions for her that she discovers. So I think that's a good analogy for what happened to me. when I first started working at the startup, and my journey through the year as well. Because I started with these huge expectations, right? Well, actually not huge expectations, just what I thought were reasonable expectations, but quite far from the reality, as it turns out. And here are some of them. I was like, definitely we'll have better tooling choices. So one of the first things when I got there was like, oh my God, Google Docs, please. And it was like copy from that to Markdown to the tool that the front-end developer used to make the help docs, and it was a mess. You know, it was a very primitive mess in the 17,000-step process. So let's fix that with a tool, right? Let's get a CMS. Then we can manage the web content and the UX content and all of the content in one place, because I do all the content too, so that was going to be hugely advantageous for me. But of course, anyone who knows anything about a CMS is, one, they're expensive. Two, they take ages to set up, really, because you need to do the content modelling properly and the architecture and taxonomy, and you've got to have you need sort of skilled people to be doing that, just me. I haven't even really worked with the CMS much before, so that was going to be another challenge. And I'm super glad that the business was like, that sounds like a great idea, but no, we do not have budget. We cannot afford it. This is not the right time to do it. And I honestly would be sweating behind the knees right now if I had to justify somehow a really huge expense of a CMS. And, you know, we're still at the kind of 100 document mark. Because the other thing I didn't know about CMSs is it's actually better to migrate to them when you've got a big, huge mess, because actually you've got a heap more of more to systematise, more to grasp onto, and more to kind of architect around that. So I didn't know that CMSs really they're not really built for little jobs, really. So one day where maybe we'll get that. The other thing that I assumed would be decisions would be much simpler, right? Because there's less people. So there's 18 people in my company, and I am the only writer. So I do get to make a heap of the decisions about the content and how we do it. And I work with great people who support me and trust me and give me psychological safety. But what I didn't know is that all of those decisions, so we're building the moving car, you know, that analogy with startups. There's nothing really unique about working in a startup necessarily, but so we're building the car as we're going, and so we're building our big features out, and the naming of those things is really important, because then we end up with, and I think Paul mentioned it yesterday, we end up with an issue, which is we've called things issues, and then later on when they're really not issues, they're still called issues, and you know, you're stuck with the language that you created ages ago. And who hasn't arrived in a job where they've sort of gone like, why did they call it that? Why it shouldn't be called that? And you know, it's not because someone willfully called it something stupid, which I used to think was, and this is the part about the pie, right? This is the humble pie. That's what I had to have been eating for the last year, which is I thought people were making poor decisions and they were choosing the wrong thing because they either didn't have the expertise or they were the wrong person for the job or that kind of thing. But what I didn't realise is they were all just outlanders, right? They were all stuck in this time and place where they could only work with what they had, and they had to make the decision that they had to make. So yes, big, bitter, humble pie. And I'm not, you know, I've had a long career and everything, and I'm really actually in some ways pleased to find out that I could be so naive and learn something so kind of big. The other thing was I was like, low debt. There's not much to fix really because we're still creating it. Great. But actually, and this is one for the perfectionists in the room, which I'm looking at literally all of you. Making poor decisions is part of my job. Sorry, I should rephrase that because making poor decisions isn't part of the job, but because I don't know the decision's poor yet, and it might be later on when we come to look at it. I can't help but have to make decisions that may have repercussions. Something's half built now, I call it that now, but then we build the other half later, and we come back to put those two things together, and now they have to all be kind of renamed or reshaped again. And the developers are facing the same thing. They're building things that they're, let's build the quick version we can get out to market, and then we'll come back and do the proper infrastructure, clear version in the background. So we're all creating this dev, and it's funny, we actually say to each other, let's just leave that for our future selves. to work out. And sometimes you just have to. You have to work at the job in front of you, and that's something that I've definitely learned. Sorry. So, if I can't choose the right good tool, and I can't make, solid decisions that are future-proof, and I can't help myself making debt, I can't kind of do that, what else should I be doing to create a really good content practice in the business? And one of the first things I thought of course, because I don't know about you, I own all of the A Book Apart and Rosenfeld Media books that are written on content and ecosystems and all kinds of stuff, content strategy. Is that I thought what I'll do is I'll find a methodology, right? I'll find a process that works. I'll delve into the books, like I had previously in other roles. How do I fix this content problem or that kind of thing? So I looked at, and I googled this, and when I was preparing this, it kind of occurred to me how frighteningly symmetrical are all of these things, right? How sort of perfectly formed and lovely colours, and look at all the circles overlapping, and that's meaningful, and those kinds of things. But I don't. And these are the best practices. It sounds like I'm criticising these frameworks. I'm not. They have these people who have created them are my content heroes. They have codified and given credibility to our profession, which has taken some time to really gain that credibility. So I can't criticise any of this. However, I don't think I've ever worked at a job where I have successfully implemented any of these things. And that kind of makes me feel a bit like a failure, like in some sort of weird way, because it means I'm kind of not meeting some kind of best practice. We're sort of taught that if we follow good processes and we implement good practices, then we will, we'll reach best practice, and best practice means that everything will be great. It means that it will work for our audience. It means we've met a standard and we've done things right. But the problem is we don't live there, right? We live here. We live on a thin little boat, flopping around in a big ocean of uncooperative stakeholders and, tight deadlines and willful neglect of knowledge bases and tooling and, all kinds of other challenges that we face. And I guess I'm drawing on this mostly from my contract practice, which is that's what I do. I sail in the boat into the dark sea and try and fix stuff. But what I realised I kept doing when I got there, because I wanted to implement frameworks, I wanted to do the best practice, is that I kept trying to change the conditions around me when I got there. So I would arrive in a business and go, they don't like content people. Well, I better fix that. They're not on board with my processes, or they're not on board with listening to, how I want to go about things, or what I do, or what I can contribute. And so what I actually should do is just, spend a lot of time trying to change that in order to create this space for me to drop down a perfect process that will somehow solve all the content problems in that kind of perfect frameworky kind of way. But if working in a startup has taught me anything, it's that I have to embrace these imperfect ways of working, and then I have to stop trying to calm the sea and stop the wind and do those other things that are not part of what I need to do as a content writer. When you work in a business, it's a bit, some of you may have worked in startups, hands up. Great, right, you know this, you're kind of hand to mouth, right? So a lot depends on getting the right thing to market at the right time. You have to impress shareholders and stuff like that. VC companies, you don't know if you're going to be there in 2 years. And these things impact kind of the way you work day to day. And it's good that they do, and I've learned a lot from it. And I want to share something that I think we've forgotten as writers, like these survival skills that we have forgotten because we lean on the frameworks. And these frameworks are external, right? The best practices and those things, they're external to us. They're not in our workplace. They're not adapted for us. And yes, we do have to adapt them if we want to use them. But we can also spend all our time out there trying to do that and not spend enough time working on the work in front of us. And I think Lisa mentioned it too, which is you sometimes just have to kind of keep churning through the work in order to get beyond the work and to achieve the bigger thing. Because if your eyes are always on the horizon, you're kind of always failing to get there. That's what I found anyway. So I want to give everyone here today permission to be more reactive. And I don't know if this is one of those terms where, you know, when you, when I've arrived at a contract position, and one of the first things I observe usually is, it's because all this content's a mess because everyone's just been reacting and creating content on the fly, and anyone creates it, and it's this reactive thing is bad. Whereas reactive is necessity, right? Reactive is what you have to do at the time. So it's not necessarily bad. So the first thing I kind of think is that you have to learn to be okay with being reactive and sometimes not achieving those really big wins for getting the job done in front of you, getting the quick wins. Not even sometimes the quick wins, just doing those necessary things like fixing links, putting in some metrics, dial yourself back into your craft, I think, and what you do, instead of really worrying all the time. And I'm not saying don't worry about those things, I'm just saying sometimes we can regroup ourselves and summon that energy and summon a new project approach or think about different ways of achieving what we want to long term. And the other thing I give everyone permission to do is feel okay about not wanting to change the crap around them, because I think there's I don't know if anyone saw it, a lady called Sarah Wachter wrote this great article recently which is called We're Being Gaslit as Designers. And I think it applies to all content folk as well, which is when a business says to you, prove your value, what's your ROI? The very act of proving it means that you have no intrinsic value because you have to prove it, if you know what I mean. It's kind of a trap, if you will, because if you have to continually prove what your value is, your organisation doesn't value you anyway because they're asking you to provide the value. And sometimes we can step off that cycle, really. In fact, we should step off that cycle, and we should do what was suggested earlier, psychological safety, which is you should just pretend that that's how it is, right? You should just pretend that you have value and you're accepted and all of those things. That's how you should walk into places. Because spending energy on proving who you are or proving your value alongside doing what you do is just exhausting. And I think that we are less, we're not as good a writers or communicators if we are spending all our time sort of doing that. It's a waste of our skills. So this is where it comes time to say it's okay to save things for your future self. You don't have to solve all the problems today. Yes, there are some big content problems. Yes, they are always going to be there. I think Lisa also had the big weight of the scale of all the things we always have to do. Those things are never going away. But we don't have to do them all today. We don't have to, in order to prove that we are providing value in our company. We can actually take some time and save things for future self. And yes, that comes from good prioritisation, but sometimes it just comes by going, I don't want to do that. It's okay. We get to choose sometimes. We are the experts in what we do. So I think it's okay sometimes to go, yes, I've heard the business case. Yes, I've heard the product manager's input on that and all the developers and all of that. This is what we're going to do. So I think coming back and having some more faith in ourselves as, autonomous decision makers is something that we could all practice a little bit more. Thanks. And enjoy the pie.
So what would you do if you didn't have the luxury of a long tail for a project and you perhaps had a month? How would you eat your pie then?
First you panic about that, how much time you've got. And then I think you have to be honest about scope. I think you brought it up yourself actually about de-scoping and being a bit more realistic. So as you can see, I have high expectations and then reality comes crashing through. So I think definitely scoping down the job, being super, super clear. When you've got less time, you have to be even more clear about what the objective is. So if it's just to fix a little set of docs, or if it's to, you can't, if someone asks you to come in and change and redo a whole system in a month, run for the hills. It cannot be done, really, unless the document set's like 10 docs.
Yeah, right. Yeah. A month is not long at all. So it was the question was about expectations versus reality, and how the people, you have to sort of manage that fine balancing act between what they want and what can actually be done realistically.
Paul brought up something interesting yesterday, which was sort of like, take a gentler approach. Don't go in with the criticism. And it made me think, I've always done that. Drop the truth bombs, just get straight through the door and have a look at their docs, and if it's all a disaster, just drop it on them, kind of thing. And I realise that's not very sensitive, actually, and I probably would do things a little bit differently in hindsight. And but sometimes when you're a contractor, you actually get to be the truth teller. This is the advantage, right, of like being the guy that they don't have to sack, but you leave anyway.
It's what you're there for, right?
It's great because you kind of get to go in and drop all those bombs, suggest ways of fixing things, and you get to be a bit of a hero in that sense. But you never get to see the outcome. You never get to see if they kind of implement or finish things long term. You get to run off to the next adventure kind of thing, and leave them holding the whatever you've left them, which, hopefully is a good thing. But does that answer your question? Yeah.
It is interesting, isn't it? For those folks here who have worked as contractors, you are in an enviable position to be able to go, you know what, this is broken. And sometimes, like, people in the organisation have been telling you this for months, but it actually takes someone external to tell them the same thing for them to actually listen. So it's a really strange dynamic, isn't it? You
can be a little bit, I think, a bit harsher as an outsider too. Not mean harsh, I just mean a bit more quick to tell the truth. Don't pull the punches, don't have to be sensitive about the CEO's wife who also does the same job as you, or any of those things. You can really just drop it on them straight away. But you also don't remember when you first start a new job, even if you're an employee, you have this very small window in which to do all of this as well, and kind of just ask really dumb questions like, oh wow, did you structure it that way? Why did you do that? That kind of thing. And I think it's such a great opportunity to sort of backhandedly and in a friendly, getting to know them way, tell them what they're doing wrong.
That's a very interesting choice you've done there with with your tape. Okay, could you explain me the rationale behind that?
Exactly. Oh, I love that. How did you achieve that?
I've never seen that before. How did you go and do that?
Yeah.
So this was your question about tooling, again, which is a common theme, but this was about starting off with the CMS and then working out that perhaps CMSs for small doc sets aren't quite right, they're better for big. What was the sort of, tell us a bit more about that.
So we've gone from Google Docs to Notion as our, I work with a really great front-end developer who handles the website and handles the Docs site as well. So he's very talented at making this data source work come out into the world. So he's been very helpful with that, and he set up a Notion, like a table in Notion. So each sort of part of the Docs has a section, a different table section, and it's still pretty clunky. Like, you update the status in order to get it to go to the pipeline. It's one of the worst things is that our deployment of our docs deploys code. So when we branch, like our branches are together of the docs and the code for the product, which is just dumb, but I cannot convince these developers to separate them yet. But also it is more expensive to separate them actually, because, So anyway, work on that.
Okay. How do you avoid the trap, the question was, how do you avoid the trap of proving your value when it comes to this sort of challenge here?
I think it's a really good question, and it's all very personal for all of us, because I would say that the way I've done it is to leave a toxic workplace that doesn't have any respect for you. I don't want to give my energy to people who don't want what I can do. However, I recognise the privilege in that. That's not okay. It's not okay for everybody to change jobs. I don't have any kids or anyone depending on me, so I can, all of that kind of thing. So I recognise that that's not the easiest solution for everybody. But I would say that making that assumption, just walking in there and making the assumption you are valuable, just avoid the conversation altogether. And when people do, if you are challenged on that kind of thing, turn it back on them and say, well, what value do you think I bring? What value were you hoping I would bring? What are your expectations? Make people define what they mean by value in the first place, because it's not a very fair question if you ask me.
That's a really good point. Very actionable feedback there. Yeah, wonderful. All right. I think, barring any other questions, we might actually wrap it there, because I'd like to invite Felicity up on the stage now. But first, let us thank Claire Mahoney.